Hey guys, I'm Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and today's video is all about avoidant attachment style and what it looks like, how you can recognize it, where it comes from, what it looks like in therapy, and what you can do about it if you or someone you love has this as their general style. Now, if you have an avoidant, or we also call it dismissing style, you might not know it. And so you've probably heard from partners a few things that might tip you off to having this style. And hopefully at the end of this video, you'll have a really clear understanding of how to own it and heal it and hopefully repair and just create stronger relationships in your life. Now, quick reminder, avoidant attachment is one of the 4 attachment styles in attachment theory, which are insecure anxious, insecure avoidant or dismissing, secure, and disorganized. So today we're really just going to focus on the avoidant, or also called dismissing style of attachment. Now, before I get started, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell, and that way you'll get notified when I post new content or new videos. So thank you so much to my subscribers so far. I'm super grateful for you guys, and I hope you will keep joining me. Okay, so let's get into it. Now, what I really want to clear up first and foremost is that this style is really defined by a certain type of parenting. Remember, attachment really is about the quality and type of caregiving you had and the way it went down between you and your caregiver. Were they available? Were they not? Did they lean into you and meet your emotional needs? Were they able to attune to you? And so the hallmark of this attachment style is what we call repeated maternal rejection. Now, here's the problem. If you're sitting in my office and I ask you about your family style, and I start to think that you have an avoidant style, and I say to you out loud, well, you had, repeated maternal rejection, I will bet you more often than not, you would say, no, I didn't. I had a pretty good childhood. I mean, my parents weren't perfect. They didn't necessarily, say I love you or super affectionate, or they did, but they took care of us. We got most of our needs met. A lot of focus on doing. The problem is this word, or this description of maternal rejection, what it really means is that instead of rejecting a child, this parent style often dismissed the child's emotions and experiences and feelings. And so the child perceives that as a rejection of self. And so that is really important, because even the word avoidant, it sounds like that person doesn't want to be in a relationship. And avoidant or dismissing styles, they do want to be in a relationship, but they often feel this need, because of their childhood, to always keep like one foot out, to protect themselves, and they have a really hard time with expressing emotions. So that leads us into, well, what does it look like when a person has an avoidant or dismissing attachment style? So I made a bunch of notes, but I do want to say this also really quickly. I labeled this video Alone in Love, because the truth of this style is that when you have, the majority of your style is avoidant, remember, you can lean into other styles, but it's generally, there's one main style, I believe, and then we can kind of, go up and down the spectrum depending on the other person we're in a relationship with. But when you have this style, it can be lonely to be you, because at some level, I don't think you can ever fully sort of let your hair down and be safe in a relationship. You're always looking for a way to protect yourself and to maintain your autonomy. And when you love somebody with this style, it can feel like they're just not completely in, that they're in it, but they're in it with certain, parameters. And so that can feel lonely sometimes, because you often just want more of them emotionally, okay? So, but let me get into what someone might do or say or express who has this attachment style. They are often, say, more thinkers than feelers, so they're very cerebral. When you ask them to engage with you about a problem, their first response is going to be very sort of intellectual or, cognitively processed, as opposed to what does it feel like. They're going to tell you what they think about it. They often are, as a result of their style, very autonomous and independent and self-sufficient. And that is because they got rewarded for that behavior in childhood. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But they often have this sort of aloofness, this independence, this sort of pseudo-independence that they had to develop, that, I'm an island unto myself and I can take care of myself. And they often do believe that no one can take as good of care of them as they can. almost to an extreme degree. They tend to not ask other people for help. If the idea of asking for help seems like, oh God, I don't do that, this might be part of your style. Because they're so focused on their own independence, they often aren't really good at understanding your emotional needs because they don't necessarily understand themselves. So what you're going to have in this situation is a partner who complains a lot that you don't open up, they never know what you're feeling, you don't really go deep with them, and those types of things. They have a tendency to be less emotionally expressive, of course, and so they don't cry as often, and that comes back to childhood why they do that, but they've really learned to just suppress their emotions. And when they do that, they can often have negative moods or irritability or anger at some point kind of low because they've always tried to contain and sort of put a boundary around emotional expression. So it can be really hard to get them to open up with you because they don't even know necessarily how to tap into that part of themselves. They tend to avoid intimacy and closeness. They tend to not like a lot of vulnerability in relationships. It makes them feel flooded and unsafe. They can tend to project their negative traits onto others. So it's really easy for them to identify what's wrong with you, but not so easy for them to sort of deeply emotionally self-reflect themselves. They often can deny their basic needs and basic fears because they've learned to contain and hold their emotions. People that have this style tend to be most relaxed and most at peace when they're alone. They tend to be what we call auto-regulators because as children they had to learn to take care of their own needs as a result of that dismissing, which felt like rejection, right, by the parent. So they often learn to self-soothe, and they can often, as a result of that, be overly invested in externalizing behaviors like smoking, drinking, video game playing, porn, things like that. They learn to manage their own emotions and regulate often alone and or through the use of other items or external experiences. And as a result of that, they often tend to do a lot of internal processing. So they are going to process alone when they're doing that state of auto-regulation. They tend to need to go really deeply within. They're not going to feel so safe to do it with you. Now, just because they like to maintain some reserve and minimize intimacy, it's not that they don't like to be in relationships. They often do want relationships, but they just feel that at some point you're going to impinge upon their autonomy and sort of like consume them. And because of that fear of being consumed, they keep this sort of rigid, boundaried dynamic. They can be a little controlling. They can be very boundaried or overly rigid about things because really their underlying fear is that you're going to get too close and they won't be able to handle it. They often can send you mixed signals and not be able to be clear of their intentions. I think that's part of their ambivalence about how they feel. They want that closeness, but it's often difficult. And so it's hard to read them sometimes. They can often have an unrealistic view of romance, like there's just that one perfect person out there and if I just find them, it'll all be okay. Or focusing on the one that got away, always going back into an old relationship that didn't work, but trying to make it work. They often have this like phantom X thing going on where there's just at some point out there, there's just going to be the right scenario and it's all going to be okay. And that is often a big impediment to them being able to find gratitude and leaning in and loving the partner that they have and making it safe for that relationship to stick and to last. So as a result of their childhoods, which I'm going to explain in a minute, they had to deactivate their attachment needs, basically turn down the volume, become more focused on self, and meet the sense of self and the self's needs, because there really was this environment where the primary caregiver was unable to attune and really dismissed those needs. And so they deactivate even their own autonomic nervous system in terms of what they need from a physical perspective, from identifying emotions from within the body. And what happens with that is that as a result, their brains, as they're maturing and growing, don't encode the memories in the same way because they don't have access to this sort of emotional material. And as a result, they often have poor memory. So they'll tell you, oh, I had a pretty good childhood. But when you start to ask for specific stories, they often say, I don't remember a lot. I can't tell you a lot, but it was fine. And it can be uncomfortable for them. They're the people who often come into therapy and say, you know what, like I'm here, I have these issues. I'm probably good, right? Like they kind of want to double check with you. Or they had a trauma, but they're often the ones I know just like that when they say, yeah, I don't want to discuss my childhood shit. Like, I don't want to go there. that's often a very clear sign sometimes that they don't want to talk about that stuff. And I don't think it's helpful to stay in the childhood stuff, but I really do believe that understanding where we come from, what the patterns are, how we engage in relationships with our current life, work, friends, kids, partners, really is often, much of it is formed in childhood in terms of relationships, because we first learn to love and expect what relationships look like from our first caregivers in the world, right? We don't have caregivers, we don't survive. So we start to learn a lot, or maybe not a lot, about what to expect from other people. So the research says that since they have learned to deactivate their attachment, they report fewer emotional memories than secure individuals and have poor immediate recall of attachment memories. And they do this because they were, as I was saying, less attentive to emotional events when they were happening. They weren't paying as much emotional attention to events when they were happening as a child, because all that emotional need was turned down. And so that gets encoded into the brain's memory areas with less information, because less information was available to them. So they're really good at distancing themselves from uncomfortable attachment thoughts while also diffusing the normal autonomic nervous system arousal that such thoughts would normally bring to others. So what does that mean? That means that as a result, they've learned to numb and turn down and not recognize those internal body symptoms and signals, that they've gotten so good at separating the body really from the mind and the feelings. There's this disconnection and separation. They're not integrated. And so that can become part of the work. But they've learned to shut down even the body's physical needs and desires and what it signals to them from emotions, because it wasn't safe and they weren't going to get their needs met anyway. So they become really good at doing that, and they're going to do that with you and with themselves, which is why it makes it so hard to get them to really lean in. So where does it come from? Just a quick reminder, as I said, it comes from this style of parenting where the parents were dismissing of emotions and experiences and needs, which the child then perceives as rejection. And what the research says is that a dismissing parent minimizes a child's experiences and feelings, as I said, which is perceived as rejection. And such a parent is uncomfortable also providing things like physical affection and comfort to the child. So not a lot of physical soothing and cuddling. Cuddling is rare, and are often rigid and inflexible in their approach to parenting. So these are the often authoritarian type parenting styles you might see. Very clear signs and signals and boundaries between who's the parent, who's the child, expectations, a lot of focusing on performance and delivering on those externals again. Not so much on who the child is emotionally, but what the child does on the performance and achievement factor. So the child eventually stops reaching out and becomes deactivated and sort of what we call pseudo-independent. This sort of fake sense of like, I've got it, autonomy, that then gets reinforced by the parents. Oh, look at, Johnny, he's so good at playing by himself. He can play with Legos for hours, or Susie plays in her room all day. These kids had to learn to self-regulate and take care of themselves from a very early age. And so it becomes safe for them to be alone. That's how they manage their emotions. They still had needs, right? They still were babies and kids in need of connection and being seen, but they weren't going to get that. And in fact, in the strange situations study, those were the babies who, and when mom left the room with a stranger coming in, they didn't even really melt down. They had already learned on the outside to contain and hold, and so their eyes would follow her. They really wouldn't get upset. When we checked out their biological markers, they were just as upset as the babies who were upset on the outside, but they had already learned to contain all of that. So that's really important. When you have a partner who's avoidant, just because you don't see it on the outside, it doesn't mean it's not happening internally on the inside. So what do we see in therapy with avoidant attachment? As I said, people often come in and they're sort of coming in to make sure that they're okay. Partners have told them that you're not very good at emotional communication, and they're like, I'm not that bad. And then they come in to see if they really are. And we start to unpack what's really going on. And it really does start with this difficulty when I ask them to recall memories, and the research supports this. They have a difficult time getting back to those memories because they didn't even get encoded in the way that other people might have had the same experiences with different attachment styles. They tend to negate less positive experiences or deny or minimize, And they don't even often see things as negative sometimes, where it's like, it seems clear to me, you don't see that as that behavior. They're like, no, that's not that bad. I mean, they took care of my needs. It seemed fine. So they have a hard time doing that. And because they often have this sort of unrealistic and a high degree of unrealistic assessment of the caregiver at times, that's not really accurate. It's often an idealized version of the parent they wish they'd had. And that often applies, I think, too, to that phantom ex, or the one that got away, or their over-idealization of romantic partners. It's this sort of high bar that can never be achieved that they almost had this like fantasy about. And I will say, as part of their autoregulation, they often can be in this like dreamy state where they are sort of in their own little world. But all of that is a sort of dissociation at times from what was really going on to cope with what was happening, in actuality. So as I said, there's a high focus on what the parents did for them rather than who they are. They often have an emotional distance as they talk about their childhood. They often focus on other people's behavior to sort of justify their own. They have a hard time with that self-reflection, and you can see why. So when you're pushing them to give you information from an emotional perspective, they're not necessarily just like have all the answers and they're just withholding it from you. It's hard for them. They don't even know how to access that emotional language sometimes. And it's terrifying and risky to be that vulnerable. So the combination, it really is a process for them sometimes to help them get more out of their head and into their feelings, into their body, and to learn the language of emotional intelligence and expression. So when I say something like, well, the classic, how does that make you feel? They have a response that tells you what they think about it. And so that's a process for them. So that's kind of what we see in therapy. Now, what can you do about this if this is the style you have or someone you love? The first thing I think that's important is to understand, where does this come from? As I was saying a minute ago, so you have some compassion for yourself and for the person you love, that it was never safe for them to be this sort of gooey, emotional, vulnerable human being. They had to learn to be autonomous, and they need to be able to hold on to their autonomy on some level. We can't just take that away from them. We have to let them learn to protect the self, but also open up and integrate connection to other people in a way that allows for more reciprocity and isn't so boundaried up and walled up. So we want to help them get more curious about their emotions, help them identify emotions, often looking at their body through mindfulness, meditation, beginning to understand, what does that feel like when I'm stressed? And then start to connect the emotions. We want to get curious about other people's feelings. What do you feel? Learning how to ask your partner, and then just learning to validate and understand, not to come back with some cerebral intellectual response or problem solving, but to learn how to just lean into the emotions with themselves and other people. We want to help them get a little more insecure, just a little bit, to learn to lean on and ask for help, to not necessarily be so walled up, and to know what it looks like to need another person and to ask for help and to be vulnerable enough, because I think it really is a vulnerable act to ask for help when you've been so used to taking care of yourself. It feels risky and dangerous and unsafe, and really like I can't really trust you to do it anyway, so I'll just do it myself. But then deep inside I feel alone, or I can even resent you for not helping me, but I never asked you, right? So that loop goes around and around. It's important to learn to identify when you are deactivating and when you're using deactivating strategies to keep yourself safe. And so remember, deactivating strategies, if you're familiar with attachment, is, doing things like saying you're committed but not really committing, staying in an intellectual response but keeping yourself from your emotions, always focusing on the little things your partner does wrong, finding ways to just pick and poke so that there is no real need to be super connected and super safe, flirting, pushing your partner away, playing games, not being available, disregarding their needs. Little ways to just keep that little bit of separation and keeps me from being too close to you. Also, really what it does is it sabotages our intimacy and relationship. So be aware of what are the things you do that tend to sabotage intimacy, and start to, work on those behaviors and help your partner if they're the one doing it. Obviously, trying to find more secure partners and healthier partners is a helpful strategy. If you're an avoidant and I'm an avoidant, one of us is going to be more avoidant, and it's probably going to make me feel more anxious if you're more avoidant. So trying to find more healthier partners who can lean in and handle your emotional distancing, but also don't let you get away with that, who are trying to pull you in and make connection. trying to not like overread signs and misinterpret. Remember, because you tend to have this lack of emotional ability to process things, you might often make assumptions that aren't necessarily accurate about what your partner's really feeling. So learning how to clarify. Let me just be clear. Are you saying you feel this way? Are you saying you feel that way? And things like that. I would say it's important to really try to work on your issues of being unrealistic and idealizing other people's parents, other people's partners, your ex-partners, your future partner, trying to get grounded and grateful in who you do have in your life and what their qualities are, and catching yourself whenever you start to wander off track and focus on the nitpicky things. Like, I get it, long-term relationships, we just do those things. But we can also learn to grow stronger in love and acceptance over time as we really let ourselves be vulnerable with someone else. Lastly, I would say things like working on your autonomic nervous system, learning how to identify your own body signals, like I said, through meditation, considering inner child work if you don't know how to connect to your child feelings and who you were, doing things like therapy, because therapy is going to be hopefully a reciprocal, healthy relationship where your therapist can lovingly, I always say this, but lean in with you and not only help you, support you, and listen to you, but also challenge you and engage you in a way to help you change your life. And then we often take that relationship and transfer that into the world. And so that can be helpful. It's really hard to heal attachment experiences just by reading books and podcasts. I'm all about, especially now, I know therapy can be expensive, but there are a lot of options now with online therapy, even more than ever. Since most of us have to do it online anyway, we're getting creative. But it really is important, whether it's through a therapist and or with a relationship. Ideally, you would be doing both, especially if you're on the higher end of the spectrum here. You would work on healing in a relationship, because the truth is I do believe, like many say, we are hurt in relationships and we can be healed in relationships. I think that's Tatkin that says that, of Wired for Love, which is a great book I'll link down below for couples or just for anybody who wants to work on their relationships. And really to understand that the healthiest way to heal a childhood attachment story is that when we grow up and we choose partners, we do choose partners who become stand-ins or replacements for our parents. In safe relationships, I can tell you, go take your medicine, you need to go to bed, you're not taking good care of yourself. We don't want to mommy or daddy each other, as funny as it sounds, but we do. We do in a loving relationship, we do provide those kind of qualities on some level. And so the healthiest way to heal this is to work on it in your relationship. And then I would say, if you are able to get therapy or even, get the attachment books and then practice the exercises with your partner, that can be really helpful. It's so important to do this work. It really can change your life. So I hope you found this video helpful. I hope that you will have compassion and love and grace for yourself and the person you love with this style. Maybe you need to show them this video if they have this style, because they probably, as I said before, think they're fine. But it really can deepen your life to have these kind of connections where it's safe to be vulnerable and to have reciprocity. So thank you guys so much for your time. Hope you will stay safe and well, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys. Thanks so much.